And I'm glad to. Mm. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. Um, so today I was just Lillian just asked me to talk about just the reality of being a nonprofit person. I know there are lots of students and from social work and faculty and other folks who may be interested in what it's like to be well be in social work. And I know some of you have more experience probably than I do. Um, I have been an executive director across two nonprofits for about 13 years, and I've been a fundraiser. I have wept in the supply closet / conference room multiple times over the budget. And there's been a lot going on. So today I just want to just first have an honest conversation about what's been going on out there and talk about what we could possibly do to change things, because I don't want folks to experience some of the same frustrations that I experience or have been experiencing. Also, if you can turn on your camera, if you can, I know not everyone can, but if you can, that'd be great, because I just love seeing everyone's face if possible. And don't worry if you're eating something like dinner or whatever. I think we need to normalize this idea, that professionalism doesn't have to be this very white-centric way of doing things. And food is very important for many of our cultures. So if you're eating stuff, if you're eating an entire pint of Ben and Jerry's or whatever, that's amazing. So don't be ashamed of it. We need to change the way we define professionalism. Okay, so thank you for
Sorry, I
turning
just
around.
have to apologize. I'll be sitting like this because I have a really weird chair. So
Absolutely. No, please sit
yeah,
however is most comfortable for you. And if you have a pet that runs across the screen, you're obligated to actually introduce your pet to everyone here, or baby or kids. Yeah, so today I just want to talk about, what are some of the good things happening in our sector? What are some of the challenging things? And then what are some of the ridiculous things that are happening? And then what are things that we can actually do about it? What are people thinking? And yeah, and I'm just gonna present a little bit, but I want this to be less formal than the normal keynotes that I have been giving over the past several years, which is very formal with the PowerPoint, etc. So yeah, please feel free to put comments in the chat or raise your hand or something, and we can just have a conversation about that. I'll present for a little bit of, I'll probably talk at you for about 30 minutes or so. And then Lily and I will have just a quick conversation for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up for conversations from everyone. So yeah, let's a few disclaimers before I start is one is that I don't claim to be an expert in anything. I've been doing this for a while, and so I'm very opinionated about everything. But I don't claim to be an expert. Like, I'm not an expert in fundraising or nonprofit or whatever, just like this one dude. So feel free to disagree with anything that I say. I also don't claim to represent anyone except myself, right? It's easy to say, oh, it's Vu, he must represent all people of color or all attractive vegans everywhere or whatever. Like, this is just one dude's opinions, okay? Yeah, and also I'll be flashing pictures of baby animals on the screen for no particular reason, except that it helps to calm me down a bit. And Japanese researchers discovered looking at pictures of baby animals increases your productivity. They got a grant to study this, y'all, okay? Like, it's amazing. These are the best grant writers ever. And they had people looking at pictures of baby animals for 10 minutes and a control group that did not. And guess who was more productive? The experimental group. So here's a baby porcupine. Wait, this is a baby hedgehog. There we go. And here's a little baby sloth. Isn't that, you're more productive already, right? There you go. So yeah, they have nothing to do with anything I'm talking about, okay? Okay, what's good? I got my master's in social work about, I don't know, it's been a very long time ago. I think it's like 20 years ago, okay? And it was quite unusual. I don't know. It was, I feel like it prepared me for a lot of things in the nonprofit sector, and also didn't prepare me for a lot of things that I had to learn on my own over the past 2 decades or so. And so let's talk about what's good, right? Let's talk about what's good first. The appreciation for our sector. Like, I love our sector. I love the people in our sector. I love social workers. I love interacting with other people who are just making the world better, because this is what we're doing. And so I'm appreciative of all of you who are thinking about, like, what can I do in my career to make the world better? And I think it's amazing. And we don't get appreciated enough in society. There's barely any shows about nonprofit work. And whenever there's a social worker being portrayed on TV, it's usually, I don't know, someone trying to remove kids from their families, and the kids have to get together and put on a talent show to save the family farm or whatever. And it's just very unrealistic, the depiction of not just social work, but like just the nonprofit sector in general. I actually started watching a show called This Fool on Hulu, and it's great. I recommend it. But the main character works at an organization called Hugs Not Thugs, and it's actually one of the more realistic depictions of nonprofits. So I highly recommend that. Right, we are like the air in the world. People do not appreciate air. Right, other sectors are like food. People see food, so they take pictures of food. They call themselves foodies, but the work that you all do is like a lot like air, and no one appreciates air until they need it or until it's gone, and they're like, oh God, I can't breathe. And this is what social work is. This is what nonprofit work is, right? And that's why, again, we're not really seen. And because we also tend to attract really nice people into the work, we are not oftentimes assertive enough about our work. So I just want to start by saying that we are amazing, and we are the third largest sector. We contribute 900 billion to the economy every year, which is about 6% of GDP. And we employ about 10% of the workforce. We are a powerhouse to be reckoned with, except that we oftentimes are very humble. And so we're not pushing enough. All right. So the good is that we're doing incredible work. We have some amazing people who are so creative here, who are doing incredible things every single day, changing policies, saving lives, building community, lifting up people. It's just absolutely incredible. Some of the biggest progress in society have been possible because of the work that we do. I think about like these amazing leaders. We think about MLK Jr. We think about Nelson Mandela. We think about all these amazing leaders, and behind them are probably a lot of organizing by nonprofit social work leaders and others who don't, someone has to take meeting minutes and write grants for these movements to happen. Right? And we oftentimes don't appreciate that. So I just want to let you know that your work is incredible, and you may not be seen by society, but you are vital. And it's important for us, for you, for us all to take a minute to really acknowledge that. Okay. So the good is that we're doing incredible work. There's some amazing things. There are some funders who are funding differently. They're being more focused on equity. They're changing the way that they're doing their funding a bit. So there's like trust-based philanthropy that has been kind of being out there, and funders are taking up on trust-based philanthropy and removing its barriers from nonprofits and so on. So there's lots of really great things happening in the funding fronts. Also, people are starting to talk about things like universal basic income and universal healthcare, things that I think were things that we couldn't really discuss much in the past, and now people are more proactive and actually starting to push for these conversations. There's been more conversations about reparation in philanthropy, which I think is which I think is really important and exciting to talk about. I've been seeing more funders actually like thinking about buying land and returning it to Native communities, for example, or funders talking about reparation for slavery, etc. So these are things that are starting to happen more in our communities, and we need to start pushing for them to happen even more often, right? So, and a whole bunch of things that we thought were immutable before the pandemic, people are now like, oh, maybe these things are changeable. We don't need to do these things the same way that everyone else has been doing, or we've been doing it for a long time, like the way that boards are run, or why do we work for 5 days a week? A lot of organizations now are moving towards 4-day work weeks, for example. Why do we have hierarchical structures with one executive director at the top, for example? And now we have more co-directorships, or even organizations that just have no directors at all, and it's very flat hierarchy. So those are some good things that are happening. All right. There's some great stuff. So let's acknowledge that. And now some of the bad stuff that's happening. Like, we still are enduring a lot of low pay and burnout. Sabbaticals are starting to happen more often, but they're still very rare. And there's just a lot of us who are burning out. The funding cycles are absolutely terrible. Like we have a lot of funders who are just shitty with their funding practices. They're just awful. And they're wasting time. So much of our time is wasted on these like shitty sort of philanthropic practices that I think we should just need to like abolish. I don't believe there should be any more grant applications, for example. Because it's like translating the same stuff from one grant funder to another, because this one funder wants this answer on a grant proposal in 500 characters, and another funder wants the same answer but in 850 characters. And many of us are like, whoa, why do we, how do we streamline this so that we don't have to do this? And I think, why are we streamlining this? This is not a reformable system. We should all just have one grant application that is used for every single funder. And if we don't tailor it, it's like, if you're interested in our work, here's our grant application. That's it. You have any questions, you can talk to us and ask questions. And this is kind of weird. And but I think we've been so bought into these systems that we can't even imagine what it's like to have a different system. And I want us to snap out of that. But if you think about it, this is it's a weird system. Can you imagine, like, I don't know, like a food pantry going to hungry families and saying, hey, hungry families, I know that you're very hungry, but we only have so much food to go around because we're hoarding 95% of it in our endowments. So we're only giving out 5% of the food. And to be fair, we're going to ask each of you hungry families to write an essay talking about how hungry you and your families are, and to fill out these logic models and budgets about and talk about what outcomes will be achieved by these essays. And then whoever writes the best essays gets the funding. That is a ridiculous, horrifying sort of system. And yet it's perfectly acceptable in how funding is allocated in our sector. And there are a few funders that are changing it, but the majority are still very much bought into this sort of Hunger Games granting model. It's still very present in our society. The Hunger Games is still out there, and nonprofits are still very much expected to compete with one another. I am exhausted by it. And I think many of us are, like, we just can't keep fighting with one another for resources. Like, this doesn't, for crumbs. And there's like so much hoarding in the sector. Donor advice funds is the latest horrible thing that's been happening. Is like donors and funders have been hoarding money in donor advice funds, which are growing very rapidly, but there are no legal requirements for them to actually distribute it out. So if you're a millionaire, well, you won't be if you're like a social worker. I'm sorry. But let's say, maybe you would. Let's say you're a millionaire and you decide to put away like $100,000. You put that into a DAF, a donor advice fund, and you get an immediate tax break on that $100,000. But there's no law that says that $100,000 has to go to any nonprofit whatsoever. There's no law. You can keep it there for the next 100 years or so. There's no law right now that says you can't do that. And it's becoming more and more prevalent in our sector. So, and meanwhile, we're just scrambling for resources right now. So the Hunger Games, burnout, the low pay, the lack of retirement fund is still very much a thing. I remember being in my master's in social work program 2 decades ago, and we're having conversations about this. Like, how do we retire? How do you retire as a social worker? How do you retire working in a nonprofit? And for many, there was no answer back then. And unfortunately, there's still really no answers now. People are barely making a living. And how do they even save for retirement? People barely have enough in their emergency funds. So yeah, it's awful. And I want us to acknowledge that, because that is something that will afflict everyone here probably. Unless you work for a large nonprofit that pays you well and also has like 401k or 403b or whatever, and they can put funding into it, right? But that is a serious thing, and I want to stop joking about that. So many of us are still joking, like, guys, I'm just gonna work until I die. That's my retirement plan. It sounds funny, but it's not. It's really awful, and I want us to be a lot more angry about this than we have been. We need to stop joking about it and get angry with funders and donors out there, because it's not a joke. You deserve to have like a secure future while you're working to change the world and make it better. Okay. Here's a picture of a little baby possum in the blanket. There you go. Yeah. And here is that little puppy snuggling with a little baby chick. Right. There you go. All right. The ridiculous is still there. Overhead is still a thing, y'all. Okay. It's just such bullshit, overhead. And I've been ranting about overhead for like 2 decades now. And it's so silly. Like in the past, I would have this, like this metaphor of like all of us are like, imagine if like a bakery has the same sort of expectations around overhead that we nonprofits have to deal with, right? Imagine if someone like a customer walks into a bakery and was like, "Hey, I want to buy a cake for some gluten-free veterans. How much would it cost for a cake that serves 20 gluten-free veterans?" And they're like, "Oh, it's $100 for this cake." And they're like, "Oh, that's really great. I'll give you $20 because I never buy 100% of any cake. You have to go and get 4 other customers to buy this cake for gluten-free veterans." And we're like, "Okay, we'll get some other funders and donors to come and pitch in to buy this cake for gluten-free veterans." And they're like, "This is great. Here's $20. But of this $20, you only spend it on 1 egg and 1 stick of butter. And I don't want any of this money to be spent on the electricity because that is overhead. And that does not directly benefit gluten-free veterans," right? This is what we've been dealing with. And it has been exhausting. And now I've switched to a new metaphor because things have been very urgent. And I think of nonprofit leaders like you as like firefighters putting out the fires of injustice. And every 3 or 4 steps, a donor or a funder stops you and asks, how are you spending this money I'm giving you? I only want this money that I'm giving you to put out fires to be spent on the water and not the hose, because the hose is overhead. And I don't want money to be spent on overhead. What is your hose to water ratio? It better not be more than like 15% or whatever bullshit. Like, how is that a thing? That is the ridiculous, and it's still a thing. And we have been very nice. We just put up with it. Well, we should just stop. We should stop trying to explain ourselves. We should stop trying to apologize for our overhead. Your overhead could be 30, 40%, whatever. I don't give a fuck about your overhead, okay? It should be like, what are you doing? And is it effective? That's what donors and funders should be caring about. But instead, they force us still to defend our overhead and stuff. And we have been way too nice to push back on it. The response to these questions should not be, "Oh, don't worry, someone else is paying for overhead. Someone else is paying for the hose and the firefighting suits. You're only paying for the water and not garbage expenses like the fire pole or the fire truck or whatever." Our response should be like, "Get the hell out of my way. I don't have time for this. Everything is burning down. Get the fuck out of my way." Like, that should be the response that we need to give, because it's ridiculous and it makes no sense anymore. I'm also getting very tired of sucking up to donors and the ridiculousness. Right now, I'm in this like prolonged battle, not with donors, but with fundraising gurus who've been teaching people how to suck up to donors for a long time. And they build careers out of it. It's like, this is how you do fundraising. You ensure that donors feel like heroes, and you make sure it's donor centric. And you make sure you use the word "you" 25 times in every appeal letter. Make sure that you center the feelings and thoughts of donors and they feel special. And it's awful. And I kind of liken it to, I don't know, like husband-centric marriages, which is a ridiculous concept. I would love it if every time I did the dishes or something, my partner writes me a handwritten thank you note. It's like, "Dear Vu, because you did it, because you washed the dishes today, our family is stronger. Our community is better because of you. Please come to this exclusive wine and cheese event for amazing husbands like you." Right? This is what it's like. That is horrific. That's not a partnership. In a partnership, you should be mutually grateful to one another. Absolutely. But you should do what is best. You should do your fair share of the work. You are doing your work, making the world better. Donors don't do the same programming and services. So what they can do is contribute money, and together we make the world better. But why are we, one person, expected to just constantly suck up to the other one? It makes no sense whatsoever. So it's sickening. And so there's a community-centric fundraising movement that has been changing it, and I'm really glad. But the ridiculousness of constantly expecting to cater to donors is still very much present in our sector, and it needs to be challenged very assertively by us, by everyone here. Okay. We still have bisplaining. Bisplaining is what my friend Allison Carney calls it, when a for-profit talks down to a nonprofit, as if we had no idea what we're doing. We've been ranting about this for like years and years, and it's still very much present in our sector. I deal with it all the time on social media. Every time I write a blog post, there's just some asshole bisplaining to me about how in the for-profit sector, blah, 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 or how nonprofits should just go out of business and just let all these social enterprises take over, or whatever, like ridiculous philosophies that they have when they have no experience with nonprofit or social work or whatever. And it's exhausting. And I think many of us in the sector are still putting up with it because we have been conditioned to be very deferential to the for-profit sector, right? Because we are always asking for money from for-profit people and ask them to be our donors and our board members. We've been trained to be very deferential to them. And I want us to really own our power, right? And really just not, I don't ever want anyone to bisplain down to us ever again. The work that we do is so vital and complex and important. And I don't think a lot of for-profit people can actually handle what we're doing right now with the same restrictions at all, right? I can't imagine like someone going to Apple and was like, hey, Apple, I bought this iPhone for like $1,100, but I want to know at the end of the year what my $1,100 was spent on, like how much was spent on supplies, how much was spent on your CEO's salary. And they're like, oh, well, I can give you the quarterly reports that we file. Like, no, just specifically what my specific $1,100 was spent on, right? That is so silly and awful. We are expected to do ridiculous amounts of work for these highly restricted, extremely limited dollars still. And it's silly. It's like, we gave you $10,000. Why didn't you end racism last year? Like, this is stuff that's asked of us all the time, you know? And I think most nonprofits would just like, they would just crumble if they're asked for the same sort of challenges that we've been dealing with. Like, can you imagine going to Apple and was like, hey, Apple, you sold 1 million iPhones this quarter. That's really great, Apple. But like, I want to know exactly, like, that's an output, Apple. That's not an outcome. I want to know, Apple, the 1 million iPhones you sold, how many people use their iPhones, update their resumes, and then apply for jobs with their iPhones. And how many people you help find jobs for Apple? Like, that's an outcome. Or how many seniors fell and broke their ankle and then they used their iPhones to go on to WebMD and learn how to foster a tourniquet for their broken ankle. So they did not go to the emergency room. And so they saved taxpayers money. How much in taxpayer money did you help save Apple? Like, this is the stuff that you are expected to do all the time. You can't just feed hungry seniors. You know, you got to talk about reduced crime rates and all sorts of stuff. All right. So much bullshit that you're dealing with. Like, this is what you're doing. And, you know, and yet you manage to get so much done. And that's what you do. So we're at this sort of existential crisis in the sector brought on by the pandemic, by the murder of George Floyd, by the police. And we just can't go back to the same shitty ways. You know, I love our sector, and yet there's a whole bunch of things that we definitely need to improve on. Yeah, so here are a few things that I think we need, and then I would love to have a conversation with Lillian and the rest and all of you here, right? So this existential crisis, we've got to figure out, like, are we going to uphold white moderation? Because I think in some ways our sector has become this giant white moderate sector that Dr. King warned us about when from his letter from Birmingham jail, when he was just like, you know, it's not like the people burning crosses who are the biggest threat to justice. It's the people, the nice people on the side saying, you know, I believe in your goals, but can we be nicer and more civil and not burn down buildings, whatever, you know, like, this is, our sector has become one giant white moderate sector. And we got to figure out, like, is this what we want to do? Is this what we want to be? What do we got to do? All right. Are we going to keep upholding white, like, moderation, but also capitalism that has been so destructive and basically the basis of all the injustice, so much of the injustice that we're trying to fight, right? How do we do that? How do we? So this is kind of what we need to do. So here are some things that I recommend. One is we need to have the audacity of ambition, y'all, okay? I love social work, and at the same time, I think it trains a lot of us to think about, like, addressing the symptoms. I want us to start, like, being ambitious about what we can address, and that will require a lot of resources. And we've been trained to think like in increments, like, oh, we can apply for $5,000 for this or $10,000 or whatever. I want us to have the audacity of ambition. So I'm going to tell you a quick story about Juicero. Anyone has heard of Juicero? It was a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine that came out of Silicon Valley, and it was $700. And you buy these proprietary packets of cut up fruit and vegetables for $8 each, and you place into this machine, and it squeezes out 1 glass of juice. Bloomberg did an investigation where they discovered that you just take the packets and squeeze them by hand. You get the same amount of juice, but faster. So they wrote about this, and Juicero tanked. It tanked and went bankrupt. But before it did, it was boasting that it had $125 million in venture capital, that it had 50 full-time engineers designing this Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. Can you imagine what any one of us or any nonprofit here or anywhere could do with $125 million? That would be much better for society than a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. But instead, many people in the sector are like, can we please have $19 to end homelessness? And then the funders are like, oh, I'll give you $2 that you only spend on paper clips on Tuesdays or whatever. And we think that this is normal. Like, how is that normal? That's not normal. So the next time that you're applying for grants or asking for money to solve these entrenched problems in the world, like, don't think that you're asking too much. You're probably asking for too little. You should add a 0 or 2, because chances are your work is more important than a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. Okay, so think about Juicero. It's juicer with an O at the end, Juicero. And read up on it, because it'll make you feel better and enrage you, because, we are dealing with so much with so few resources. And then all these asshole companies are just getting a ton of money to do just ridiculous, horrible things, useless things, okay? So have the audacity of ambition. We got to change our mindsets about a lot of philanthropy. We still have this mindset, oh, it's other people's money. It is not other people's money, all right? A lot of philanthropy, a lot of wealth in this country has been built on 5 things: slavery, stolen indigenous land, worker exploitation, environmental degradation, and tax avoidance. A lot of wealth in this country have been built on those things. And then they get funneled into donor advice funds or family foundations or whatever. And then we apply for it. And we're told to be grateful for any amount that we get. And I want us to stop. Like, this is not other people's money, right? We also have to stop with this sort of philosophy that, like, there's only so much money to go around. There's so much money sitting there in endowments, like over $1.5 trillion in endowments, donor advice funds, while, things are burning down. So that when funders and donors are like, well, we only have so much money, it's like, that is total bullshit. So don't believe them. Okay? Stop using this corporate framework for everything. We don't need to compare ourselves to business people at all. We can be grateful, sure, we can learn from them and their mistakes like Juicero, but we are doing incredible work, and we don't need to compare ourselves to business people ever. End the Hunger Games. Stop playing this Hunger Games that you've been like trained to play. Help other nonprofits out. Introduce your donors to other nonprofits. We got to organize way better, y'all. Okay. I have been saddened because in my social work master's degree, I was learning a lot about organizing. And there's just the power of community mobilization and organizing. And as I got out into the field, I realized that many of us don't use those skills anymore. Probably some of the most powerful skills is community mobilization, and we just stop. And we've been trained to be, how to do a logic model, how to write a personnel manual, theories of change. But what we really need is like how to get 100 people onto a city hall meeting, into a city hall, town hall meeting, stuff like that. That is way more impactful. And we need to be doing a lot more of that. But instead, we've been trained to go into this toxic intellectualization mode, where we think that if we just think about stuff and attend meetings and put sticky dots on easel paper, voting on priorities or shit like that, that somehow we're being productive when we're not. Less toxic organizing, toxic intellectualizing, and more organizing work. Okay? We got to get political, y'all. Like, we really need to get political. We've been terrified of it. And I think there's no way we can address these issues without figuring out how we can be more political in our work. And we've got to focus on the levers of power. For example, electing more women of color into every political office. We got to protect voting rights. We got to change the tax codes. We gotta like undo the influences of corporations on our policies. And that means we're gonna have to burn a few bridges, y'all. Okay. So this is kind of what we need to do. And we also need to examine how we're personally complicit in this work as well. So here is little baby goat in a sweater. Right. Here is this little mischievous raccoon, baby raccoon. Look at it. Look at that little head tilt. That's adorable, right? Okay. And last baby picture, baby animal picture. Little baby piglet and some poinsettias. But that's all I'm gonna rant on about for right now. And I would love to just get into a little conversation. So Lily and I will have just a quick conversation, and then we just open it up to everyone here just for us to have a robust conversation about anything that's on your mind at all.
Yes, definitely. I think if you have questions, make sure you either put them in the chat or hold on to them for a few minutes. But Vu and I had the opportunity to talk a few days ago, and we start on one subject and end up kind of going to everything. And so one of the things that I know we talked about was both of us being, people of color in this field. Those of us who are drawn to this field are drawn to it because of something, right? You're children of immigrants, you're from marginalized communities, you've had lived experience. And so talk to me a little bit about this, Vu, because I think you've been an executive director, right? You're a social worker, you've been an executive director, and now you work for yourself. This field that we're in relies on the work of us, but the leadership in many of the organizations does not look like us or like the people it serves. What was your experience like being an executive director?
Yeah, I remember working under a white woman executive director for my practicum, and it was very challenging. And I decided I did not want to work in that environment, and if I can, I'm just going to get out of it and be my own boss. That sounded a lot easier than it actually was when I got my master's in social work. And I got out and I couldn't find work, and I ended up becoming just AmeriCorps member for a couple of years. But yeah, and from that, I learned there's a whole bunch of stuff that I did not learn. For example, I was at a Vietnamese serving organization, and none of the stuff I learned in my master's program really applied. Like, because in the program it was like, here's how a board works, here are the bylaws and etc. But it didn't talk to me about like the trauma of board members from a Vietnamese community who went through a war, who now joins a board, not just because this is a hobby for them, they want to contribute back to the world, but because they are traumatized by the war, and this is a way of them reclaiming some sense of identity and power and status in their community. And so some of them were on the board for like 20 or 30 years. And I remember kind of like the first time going up to them, or going to some funders and saying, hey, what do we need to do so that you can fund us, because you haven't been? And they're like, oh, you need to get rid of your board members. They've been on there for 20 years or so. And I went out to my board members and I was like, y'all need to go. Like, we're not going to get any money until you're gone, right? And it was extremely hurtful to them. So the lesson I learned was that all the stuff that we've been taught and stuff, it doesn't necessarily apply in this culturally relevant context. And a lot of the stuff we've been taught about fundraising, about capacity building, about boards, about leadership, all of that, or none of that applies for a lot of the communities we're trying to work with. And so it was sort of this dissonance that all the stuff I was taught in this very white patriarchal system now is not only not helpful in these contexts, but was actually very harmful. Like the harm that I did going to these elders and telling them that they are doing damage to the community, they need to leave, when it was so tied to their sense of identity, right? So that was something that I had to learn really quickly is, like, we cannot just look to these established leaders or like positional leaders who are oftentimes white to guide us in this work. And also, many of us have the answers, and we need to learn to listen to our intuition around like how do we work better with many different communities.
Yeah, and along with that, I think we overwork ourselves, right? I think that many of the people on this call can identify with that. You go into nonprofit work because you have a personal tie to it, you have a passion, you care. And so I'm trying to do a better job as somebody who's working with students to kind of help prepare them for the realities of, you want to believe nonprofits are these magical fairy tale lands that are going to do, all these great things, but this is the reality of it, but also kind of learn from what the rest of us have gone through, because the truth is you go into this and you work really hard, you make crappy pay, you're constantly the rest of your life trying to catch up, like what you were talking about, whether it's retirement savings or just kind of keeping up with stuff. And so I want to share a quote that I've so the And Now Collective is the one that brought this to me, but it's a quote by Nikita Valerio. And it says, shouting self-care at people who actually need community care is how we fail people. And so I think that's very fitting for the work that we do. But I also want to kind of pivot a little bit and talk about our community. So this community, like the people who are on this call, the people who are the social workers and nonprofit professionals who do this really hard work, it's easier for us to take care of other people and put all of our energy and time into that. We don't do that for ourselves. We might do it for each other to some degree. So talk to me a little bit about that, because I think that's part of it too. Like, we're burning out. And then what do we do about that?
Yeah, I think we're burning out, one, because the systems are really awful in many different ways, right? The systems that don't respect us or pay us well and kind of take advantage of us. I also think that we burn out because many of us have trauma, and we have maybe a savior complex in some ways, right? We want to save people, and we don't take care of ourselves enough or fully, because we haven't really addressed some of the trauma that we went through. Like as an immigrant kid, for example, like I remember what it was like for my parents to move here, and that inspired me to go into social work, because I wanted to help provide the sort of services that would have benefited me and my family when we first arrived. But I didn't realize just how much of an impact like that experience has shaped me, and how it's really hard for me to think about self-care. Like many of us are shaped by our family background and upbringing. Like I never saw my parents taking a break. They never went on vacation, right? They were always constantly working. And for many of you, if you think about like, what are the messages you learned from your parents? Like, did they ever say, hey, you need to take a rest? Like, likely for many of us from marginalized communities, we did not get these messages at all. And we internalize them. We internalize different other messages, like you need to work all the time, you need to work twice as hard as other people to be half as successful, etc. And I appreciate these things, but I also am concerned about what sort of, like, how we internalize that. Because now our kids of color are just like, I gotta work twice as hard as everyone else to be half as successful. And I think that's awful. Like, and we gotta figure out how to break that cycle. I remember when I was working, my partner and I were both on our bed, just like working on our laptop, and our little 3-year-old ran into the room and he was like, Mama's working and Daddy's working and I'm not working. And he ran back outside and he grabbed his toy laptop and he came back into the room. He jumped onto the bed with us and was like, I am working now too. It was like 8 p.m. I was like, what the hell are we doing? If that is right. I don't want my kid to think like that. I think it was an epiphany for us, because we're like, okay, let's put down our laptop. Let's actually hang out with our little kid, but we don't realize how much we internalize that. So yes, the systemic issues are definitely present. And at the same time, we all have to deal with the sort of like personal trauma we've been dealing with and the messages we've learned as well.
Yeah. And so what do we say to this next generation who's on the call right now? Don't do what we did. I mean, I think that's the hard thing, right? When you work with the next generation, but also if you have an intern, if you mentor people, whatever your role may be, I think it's imperative. But again, that's putting more on us, right? Like we're constantly kind of thinking, how can we help others and how can we support others? But I think as a community, again, a community of nonprofit professionals, a community of social workers, what can we do to support each other and ourselves, right? In a way that goes beyond kind of the temporary, go take a bubble bath kind of stuff that we're taught that isn't really effective or helpful or all of those things, right? So as somebody who you've done that trajectory, right? You became an ED and then you said, I don't want to keep doing this for the many different reasons you've talked about. many of our students nowadays say, I want to be an executive director. I want to start a nonprofit. What do you say to those young people?
I would say go for it. I think that we definitely need people. I'm always very grateful for folks who want to be an executive director, who want to run a nonprofit. And the reality is a lot of nonprofit directors burn out because there's just so much on our shoulders, and the systems are not designed to support us, especially in the sort of progressive movements. If you are from a conservative movement, you get a lot more support. That's just the way it is. So yeah, I'm very grateful. And at the same time, I also want to sort of hope that you sort of learn some of the lessons that the older executive directors from previous years and generations have been learning. Like, for example, like leadership doesn't have to be a burnout. Like, you don't have to. This is something that I learned from a younger executive director who came into my organization, and they were like, why are you complaining about burnout? Why don't you have like a lot of power here. You're the ED. Like, maybe you should just change it. If you don't like doing this, hire someone else to take it on. The ED job is really not realistic for one person to do. So now there's more co-directorship, right? I hired a managing director who was basically a co-ED, and they did everything that they were good at and they enjoy, including operations, HR, stuff that I just did not really enjoy at all. And I was able to focus on what I was good at, which was like writing and fundraising and thought leadership and stuff like that, and strategy and stuff. And it was great. And it helped to prevent burnout. And so you don't have to do the same things that you were taught. Like, all of this stuff right here is completely immutable. Like, it's completely changeable. So you can change it. You don't have to do the same. You don't have to have like a board that works the same way. Like, boards are really shitty, y'all. Okay, they're terrible. 2/3 of them are completely useless, if not destructive, to nonprofits. And a lot of people are like, well, what can we do? We have this board structure. No, you can have liberatory board structures. You can have, like different structures, co-op models of boards or whatever. Like, you don't have to have this very white corporate model of boards that uses Robert's rules. Like, who the hell is Robert? Why are we still using his rule? Like, it makes no sense. Okay. So if you're going to be an ED, absolutely. But take care of yourself, and also flip some tables over, and you don't have to do things the same as I have done it in the past.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect transition to, I want to get to any questions that we have from anybody, particularly some of the students on the call. So if you have a question, you can just either raise your hand or there's a question in the chat. I don't know if you can see it. This is from Victoria. How can our nonprofit express our disappointment with the program officer's methods while still moving forward in collaboration to fulfill our legacy mission? So how do you navigate those conversations and those relationships?
Yeah, thank you. This is always a challenge for many folks in our sector, right? Because you don't want to offend these program officers, because if you do, they may cut funding, and then your communities suffer because of it. It is a very real fear. At the same time, I want us to really challenge a lot of these assumptions that we have, that the fears are based on. Like, for example, the fear is, if we are very honest with our program officer or funding allies, that they would get scared and they would leave, right? Because that's one assumption. Another assumption is that if we lose this funding, like, everything will collapse, and we won't, like, there are many assumptions that we make. Well, let's challenge these assumptions. There are many program officers who actually are craving honest feedback right now from people. And that's the one thing that they always tell me is, like, I can never tell if nonprofits are being honest with me because of the power dynamics. I just can't. Yeah, there are lots of asshole program officers all the time as well, right? But there's a lot of program officers who want to be allies, and they have the same power dynamics with nonprofit leaders. They have the same power dynamics with their own board of trustees as we have with them, right? They're afraid of, like, offending their board of trustees, who are mostly rich white people. And so what happens is that us being afraid of them because of the power dynamics, and them being afraid of their own bosses because of power dynamics, we figure out how we can start working together to challenge like all these different systems. So that's one assumption we need to start with. Another assumption is that if you piss off donors or funders, you will lose funding and it can be replaced. But that also doesn't always hold true. Sometimes it does, but oftentimes it doesn't. Like I think about the Girl Scouts, I think of Western Washington. They had this asshole donor who came up to them and was like, hey, we'll give you $100,000, but you got to promise not to serve transgender girls. And Girl Scout was like, no, hell no. Like, where are you assholes? Like, I don't know. I wasn't there. I just assumed that's what they said. But they turned it down. They went on social media and said, hey, this donor said this, and they did not give us the $100,000 that we were hoping for. Can you please help us raise $100,000? And they raised $300,000 because they were aligned with their values, right? This is what we need to start thinking about. It's like, where are our values? Where are they? And when do we stick up for them? And when can we actually be a little bit more flexible with our donors and being where they're at and so on, right? So it's important to challenge many of these assumptions. And going back to my organizing thing, also, we need to organize because, yeah, if you as one person give feedback to an asshole program officer, then yeah, you could get punished for it. But if like 20 organizations band together and saying, hey, this is a challenge that we've all been experiencing, it's going to make it a lot harder for them to punish any one individual or organization. And we've been seeing more of that. Like over here in Seattle, 180 executive directors of color got together, wrote an open letter to the funders in the area and saying, you are not giving enough money. We need you to double the amount of money you're giving out. It needs to be over 5 years, it needs to be general operating. And you need to sign this pledge saying that you're going to do it. And they got like a dozen funders to sign the pledge and to give out more money. So we have to start organizing a lot more.
I want to get back to that because I think that's a very good point, but I also see a hand up. Is it, I'm sorry, Karat?
Hi, yes, it is Karat. So I have a question related to shared leadership and how it is showing up, or shared leadership specifically for BIPOC leaders. I am a part of shared leadership in an organization, a legal organization in Seattle, and I feel like I feel like I'm still tokenized, for the optics, and the reason I say this, that I was actually, just because, I guess all to say, how would you address that when people of color talk about race and equity? Oftentimes, second wave feminism and all of this, people that kind of take it as a personal attack, and almost feels like, hey, you're not supposed to have an opinion or be the leader that we are asking you to be. Just be there for the optics for the donors who are adopting the community-centric fundraising model and the trust-based philanthropy and all of that. But at the same time, I feel like leaders of color are being put in place without any guardrails, which I think need to be there, because for a very long time we have just like managed up, you know what I mean? And I'm wondering if there are other shared leaders within this group as well, and what their experience has been, and if it's working out, and how are you dealing with the optics of the organization, more so of like actually being respected by the people who you work with, because I'm the only woman of color in the organization at this time, which is also saying something, because we talk about gender affirming care, repro care, and yeah, so I don't know. I am pissed and I'm confused. So anyway.
Thank you, Karat. I'm sorry. I can empathize with how challenging it is to be in that space where you're tokenized, and when people just throw out these new terms and concepts without really understanding them or really fully absorbing them. I don't know. I think there's some optimism in that, like we're in this space where, like in the past, shared leadership is just not a thing. People just look down on it. And now we're having more and more people looking at shared leadership. But there's in this in-between space right now where that has yet to shake up and see where it lands, right? I think in the future, probably in 5-10 years, there's going to be a lot more normalization of shared leadership, and in which case these challenges that you're experiencing may not be as intense. So you're in some ways on this sort of frontier, right? You're blazing a trail for other people, and I hope that you just kind of take pride in that, because yeah, it is hard blazing a trail, and it's trailblazing is very tiring. You get attacked all the time by people who want to walk the same path that they've always walked because it's safer and so on. Right. I recommend that you find allies and talk to folks who are doing this. For example, RVC, my old organization, when I left, you know, it became a 4 co-ED model where each ED takes on 50% of an ED's work. So together it's 200%, which is basically what one ED's job is, right? And they've been doing it very successfully, where they have this sort of circular supervisory model where one ED supervises the next one in a circle. It's quite fascinating, and they've been doing this for like this past 3 or 4 years, and it seems to be working. RVC. So there's other models, not models, but like organizations that are doing similar things. So yes, Danielle, the glass cliff, like you're facing this, and in Seattle we have a lot of glass cliff situations where people will hire a person of color, woman of color especially, into a position that used to be occupied by like a white person or a white man especially, and without all the guardrails. And they keep, and they fail, and then the organization's like, see, we tried equity and it didn't work, so we're gonna go back to hiring white people into this position, and it's this horrible self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So yeah, I guess the only advice I give for you is like to find community who are doing this, and yeah, and be a support for one another.
I just want to chime in there because when you were asking that question, I feel it so deep inside, because as a woman of color, I've been in that position where I think I was hired in part because it made somebody look good, right? And then you work and you work and you work, and they get as much out of you as they can, but you're never appreciated and you're never paid what you should be paid, and you're never kind of treated with the same level of respect that you see them give towards others. And I will say that this was hard for me to accept, and it's hard, I think, for all of us, but there comes a point where it's okay for you to be done. Like, right, you are not single-handedly responsible for fixing it, whether it's the organization, the individual, the whatever you're working in. And I think that's really hard for us to accept, because we've been trained to think it's our role to go in and knock down, barriers and do all this stuff, and it is. But as an individual, they're, again, because you're being you're dealing with things other people don't deal with. And so it's okay, I think, for us to tell each other there's a point where you can say, I'm done, I'm stepping away, and I'm going to go do good work somewhere else. And that is also something I try to impart on students, right? Because I don't know that I heard that very much from others. And so it took me a long time to learn that lesson.
Thanks, Lillian. I was talking to another social justice leader in education, and she was talking about how a lot of these sort of affinity groups, one of the most important things that they can do for one another, one of the most effective things, is to give one another permission to leave. And I think that was a really profound realization for me. Like, yeah, try your best, but you are not, like Lillian said, like you're not indebted. The work will still be there. And, sometimes you may have to leave for your own well-being.
Yep. So there's another question in the chat that I had skipped. Thank you for the person who reminded me. From Ginny. Vu, what are your thoughts about AmeriCorps now? Are nonprofits exploiting Corps members as a supply of cheap labor? I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to let Vu answer.
I don't know. I always joke that I was reading this Onion article, and it was like, nonprofit fights poverty with poverty. And it always makes me think about AmeriCorps, because it was a horrible, I mean, I love my experience, but I was also subsisting on ramen and spaghetti every day for 2 years, and living in a shared room in someone's basement. And I just think that there's so much inequity that's been built into it. And we can learn some stuff from AmeriCorps. I took a bunch of lessons that I learned from AmeriCorps and applied it to my organization that I founded called Rainier Valley Corps. And the core is very similar. Well, we take these leaders of color, provide them with a job for 2 years, and send them to work at organizations led by and serving communities of color. And we provide them with a living wage and all this stuff. But in the beginning, we were I was so proud because we were paying them like $19 an hour or whatever. You know, and now they're making like $58,000 a year, these fellows, which is still not enough, but it was way better than the $15,000 or $18,000 a year that I was making as an AmeriCorps or Vista. And so we can learn from these models. We can take what's working, which is like the fellowship. Like I love being able to bond with other fellows. Like that is something that's very, I still am in contact with the people in my cohort like 20 years later. You know, like that is very strong. The mentorship was really important. The thoughtfulness and the trainings and all this stuff. But yeah, we definitely need to pay people and provide them with healthcare. Like we shouldn't have people like qualify for food stamps in their orientation. Like I remember going to orientations like, this is how you apply for food stamp. Like that is not okay. It's not okay. So we can do better. We take what works and then really improve it.
Anybody have any more questions? Trying to see if any hands are raised. Oh, I think can you see that, Boo, in the chat?
Yeah. Yeah, please, everyone, you don't have to ask questions. Please just go ahead and make comments too. Or if you want to rant about something, this is the space for it as well. So you don't have to ask a question whatsoever. And in fact, if anyone is wants to speak up, I will flash pictures of baby animals. They look anyone who is
Bring back the
little
raccoon.
the raccoon. Wait, but here's a little baby panda. All right, little baby panda.
So I'm gonna read it out loud just in case somebody can't see it. From Melanie, it feels like the nonprofit structure as it exists by its very nature does not align with the values or liberation that we are trying to move forward. No matter how many bridges we burn or prove our authenticity, how do you personally reconcile or live with the harm reduction that nonprofits do with the systemic transformations that are so urgently needed too? Easy.
Yeah, thanks for the softball, Melanie. I appreciate the question. I don't know. This is when improv skills are very helpful because it teaches you about yes and, you know, which sounds like a cliche, but I do appreciate it, right? Yes, we are in some ways perpetuating some of these systems, and at the same time, we're helping a whole lot of people who would otherwise be destroyed by these systems. And how do we actually, you know, but like I think about like some of the really great movements we've had, like marriage equality, for example. You know, people were fighting, people way before many of us were here, were fighting it for a long time. And then suddenly, you know, it happened. And it's because there's like many of us working and we're within this terrible system. And at the same time, trying to change it at the same time, you know? And that's kind of what we kind of have to do. That's kind of our charges as people who take on this work. Now, how do we do this in a way that is true to our values and that doesn't burn us out? That's kind of the challenge that we have to tackle moving forward. And there's really no clear answer for many of these things. Like, you know, I get tired all the time. Like I remember this is one of the reasons why I couldn't be an ED anymore. Was I just remember just one time just talking to a donor and was like, hey, you know, would you consider donating $10,000 to this work? That's amazing. And, you know, and she, a really great person that I respect, you know, just like started laughing because she's like, there's no way I could give you $10,000, you know? And I was like, but I did everything right. I did like the wealth engine research. I did my ass. I had built relationships over months and years, you know? But I'm like, this system doesn't make any sense. The system where we become the Sky Mall catalog for rich people to pick and choose from, you know, like it makes no sense whatsoever. Like we should be changing the tax codes so that rich people are not, you know, hoarding money and they're paying their fair share of taxes, and we don't become this conscience laundering mechanism and charity washing mechanism for the inequities that we're trying to address. Like, so yeah, this sort of dissonance that like I feel all the time. And in fact, if you're doing this work with any form of integrity, you will feel this dissonance. I call it the personal integrity paradox, which is the more integrity that you have, the more shitty you will feel because you will feel misaligned with that sense of integrity. It's kind of like being a crappy parent or a good parent. If you're a good parent, you always feel like a crappy parent. That's just the way it is. Like you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna screw up my kids, etc. And the crappy parents, they never feel like they're crappy parents. I think that they're amazing parents. The same with educators. Like really good educators always worry about being a bad educator, and terrible educators don't think that they're ever terrible. So the fact that you're like thinking about this, like how do we do this work and not perpetuate the same harm, the same system, means that you're doing something right. Doesn't mean that we will solve all these issues, but that is how we'll get there.
Thank you for tackling that very softball question. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. What's on everyone's mind here, y'all? Okay, I promise I won't write about it and put your names there, so it'll be confidential, etc. Here's
It'll
a
be a
picture of a
pseudonym.
baby koala.
So I want to build on Melanie's question because this is a big thing right now in the social work field, but it goes beyond just social work, right? Abolition. So the struggle that many of us have in this profession, as our profession evolves and parts of it evolve, some people don't necessarily evolve with it. But this idea of burn it down, right? These systems that we have, they're not salvageable. Many of us have spent years in those systems, working with police, working social services, just all of the things. And you've done what you can to make it better, but you've come to the realization that I can't fix the system, right? And so just talk to me a little bit about that, because I think that's part of what we're talking about here, right? And kind of that double-edged sword of, we would love to build up these systems that actually work, right? New systems that look very different, but the reality is what we have in front of us. So even if you are an abolitionist, the fact is this is the system we have. How do you reconcile that?
Thanks, Lillian. I'd love to hear from anyone who's figured it out. Like this is that sort of dissonance is a lot. Yeah, I mean, I talk about burning down systems all the time, but the reality is like how do we do this? You know, like it is hard, but I think the first step, like when I talk to people, they're always like, "Boo, you're preaching to the choir." Like, are we really though? We're not really a choir. Like we're a group of people singing, maybe, but we're not singing the same song, and we're not really a choir. And I have other people opposing me in the sector who want to keep the status quo. So it's exhausting trying to figure out how to burn stuff down when other people are like constantly putting out the fires because they're white moderates or whatever. So I don't know. I honestly haven't figured it out yet. And it's giving me high blood pressure. Like I had to start taking high blood pressure meds now because they're like, you're very stressed out all the time. Why is this? That's another thing I would say is like, these things are not going to be solved easily. And even if we find a path, it's still going to be challenging. And I want you all to really take care of your, not just your mental health, but your physical health, because social work does take a toll on us. And we age. Like I just turned 24 and just look at me. Like this is, I'm just kidding. I didn't turn 24. Yeah, so it's, I don't know. And I would love to hear from anyone who has any ideas. Aubrey, so great to see you here. Hi, did you raise your hand?
I did. Well, I was wondering, I had a question kind of tying in. When you talk about, have you seen anything about, I've been wondering about nonprofits organizing. As a former executive director in the food space, I realized there's some of the really large entrenched organizations that have been benefiting from things not changing, who have zero intention of things getting better, and that's where all the money goes. So, I've been wondering about organizing. Could we unionize some of these like food pantries and smaller ones to, move things forward? But I think that's been one of the places I've been stuck, is how do we actually start to organize together to move some of this work forward? Like, community-centric fundraising. I guess I'm hoping, I'm looking at places like the large ones that, say they're the leaders, but they've been leading us here, and I don't want to be here anymore.
Aubrey, are you running for office? Is that what I recall?
I'm going to run for county supervisor here because I've been on the other side of the supervisors for so long of begging them for money. I was like, what if I could just be the one that has all the money and infrastructure and gets to go to meetings? Like, I've been doing it the opposite for too long.
That is probably one of the solutions that we need to look at. I would love for more social workers to run for public office. And I mean, like, why do we think that all these folks from real estate and law or whatever can actually run cities better than we can? You know, when you all have more of a systemic analysis of poverty and homelessness and things, because that's what we've been trained to do, right? So I want us to get, I mean, that audacity of ambition and that sort of imposter syndrome, like we need to get through many of these things so that we can start like getting more power here. And I see so many like the most brilliant people who really should be city council members or mayors, and they're just like, no, I'm just too shy. And then all these incompetent people who are also evil at the same time get elected into office, right? So I would really encourage you like to follow Aubrey's lead here and think about running for office. It has its own challenges as well, politics does, absolutely. But I think this is something that we need to start considering more.
I will say too, I feel like going into politics, I would expect some of the crap that we've been dealing with. I will say I was 10 years ago I called myself an accidental nonprofit founder. I was shocked at a lot of this stuff. I feel like I'm very prepared for politics now after 10 years in the nonprofit, running a nonprofit.
Yeah, it's so political. You know, we're dealing with donors, we're dealing with people in power, we're dealing with constituents. We're probably the most ready people to run off, you know, run for office ever. So, sorry, I think I derailed the conversation a bit, Lillian, going into politics and stuff. Yeah.
No, that's good. We're a political social work program. I worked in politics, other people, that is a big part of it, but social workers and nonprofit professionals tend to get very frustrated. So I applaud you, Aubrey, because you're actually doing it. We tell people to do it, but then we don't do it. So you're actually doing it. There was something in the chat I want to bring up because I think it's very important. Emily, personal integrity paradox sounds similar to the imposter syndrome concept. Great point. And I want to say we have done some work here, and now Collective did a session for us last spring around imposter syndrome, because really this is very prevalent in the nonprofit community in terms of especially the groups we've been talking about today and the people who've been speaking up today. This idea that we are the problem, as opposed to, again, the system or the organization is the problem, because again, we have this idea, we romanticize these nonprofits that they're doing good work and they're helping poor people and they're wonderful. And so you go in and you start questioning, and sometimes you feel like there's something wrong with you, because why would you question this great work? So I do want to point that out because I want to remind people, imposter syndrome is actually not about you, right? It's about all the things that are making you feel that way.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder, Lillian. Yeah, just real quick on the political thing, I appreciate Dr. Blankenship's reminder that many nonprofits, 501c3s, can still do a lot of advocacy and organizing work. You can't endorse political candidates, but we still need to do a lot more advocacy and sort of lobbying, registering people to vote, etc. Yeah. Those things are, you can do like a lot of it under 501c3. And we need to encourage funders for 501c4s and PACs as well, because then they can endorse political candidates. I'm on an organization, a funder called Progress Alliance of Washington, and it's a 501c4 and a 501c3 and a PAC. And one of our programs is called the First Miles program, where, it's like the candidates, especially candidates of color from marginalized communities, this may be like their first sort of political race. And we provide them with funding and support to ensure, and like half of the people that we've been supporting like get elected into office, which is pretty amazing. So we need more of these types of programs as well.
Yes, and you can lobby as a C3. That's a discussion that we always have. You can lobby. There was another hand, but I don't want to skip over. Did somebody else have a hand up or took it down?
Well, Victoria asked, what's a wealth engine? Sorry, it's maybe the term is not wealth engine, but it's like a sort of database where you can look up donors and how wealthy they are, whether they own a house or a boat or whatever. It's really creepy. Honestly, I don't like it. Right? But a lot of us fundraisers have been trained like this is what you do, and now this with AI and everything, like data is being collected, and it's kind of creepy. Like I don't really like this sort of voyeuristic fundraising where we look into what donors own and et cetera. It's kind of gross, and where else they donated to and how much, and there's certain things that we need information on, but like I don't know, it just seems a bit too much. Yeah. So yeah, AI is definitely coming, and I'm not sure where it falls. It probably falls into good, bad, and ridiculous right now. Zulia has thoughts on AI chat GPT used in our sector. I wrote a couple of blog posts on this, but there's definitely ethical considerations that we need to think about, right? A lot of AI, especially images and so on, is ripped off of unpaid artists' work and so on. We have to be very thoughtful. We also have to be thoughtful about like how we use these things in a way that doesn't violate people's privacy and information. For example, I was hearing about an organization that uses AI like bots to go and scope out donors' Facebook accounts and social media, and then they use that to personalize individual letters, asking them to donate. And I'm like, I'm not sure how I feel about this. Like this is, and then other people are like, well, but it's like public information. Like this is something that they put out there in social media. They, it's accessible if they don't lock their accounts or whatever. So I think one is that AI is coming, and it's going to be normalized in its usage. However, how we use it ethically is going to be something that we need to really consider right now. ChatGPT, I've been using it just to test it out and figure out what the heck it is, just so I can be informed and writing about it. And it has actually been useful. I mean, it can't write what I'm writing, thank goodness, right? But it's kind of terrifying. Like I would put in like write a sonnet about capacity building, and it will do it. Something that would take me hours, it can write it out in literally 10 seconds. I could be like, write me like a song talking about funder ineffectiveness, and it would just do that. Or sometimes I'll be like, hey, here's my blog post, come up with 10 potential titles for it, and it'll come up with it. And so it can be very useful. And I think it can also be useful for like fundraising, because a lot of it is terrible. If there's one place we can use AI and ChatGPT for, I think that is not so much ethically questionable. It's probably with grant writing, because the whole system is bullshit, right? And if some funders are like, well, I want this answer in 500 characters instead of 1,000. Have ChatGPT do that. Just have it do that for you, because the whole thing is bullshit, and you have more important things to do.
So I saw Aubrey put a message in here. Luckily, a rich white man took over my role because he can work for free. And that made me think about when I started a nonprofit right out of college. I worked at an organization that was 99% women, right? It was a women's center. And there were women who've been working there for years. And what I realized one day, it just hit me, was they're able to do this work in these jobs because they're married to men who make money. And some of them were very proud of that, saying, I'm here because I enjoy this work, but I don't have to worry about paying my bills. So I say that because I think a lot of what we were talking about how, not getting paid well, kind of not getting credit, all that stuff. I think some of it, or not some of it, a lot of it is based on the fact that this profession, whether it be social work or nonprofit work, is very much based in like, it was just the nice ladies doing helpful things. And that's kind of how it's been seen traditionally. And then it became people from marginalized communities coming in to help their own communities, right? And so again, it's not valued, it's not paid. So I just wanted to point that out because that's still happening, right? A rich white man is able to go in. And I've also seen that happen when they bring in, like you were mentioning, Boo, EDs from the business world. And we're supposed to be grateful that they came to the nonprofit world, but they came as an ED. They've never done any other work.
Yeah,
I'll say that's actually the rich white man who took over the nonprofit I founded 10 years ago was a former CFO of a huge hospital system who told me after 6 years, he just had a really hard time because he's used to using billions and not, and I was like, yeah, it's harder when it's hundreds and thousands, but he took over for me. And so he now gets to, I was like, well, good luck with those hundreds and thousands. But it's, again, after 10 years, it didn't matter how much I knew. I'm still not the CFO of a former hospital, hospital system. So I'll never know enough.
I'm sorry, Aubrey. Just going back to sort of subsidizing things, I think it does do a lot of damage to the sector when we're not thoughtful about that. And I myself have made mistakes, like when I was underpaying myself as the ED, right? And I thought I was doing the organization a favor by saving it money, but what happened was I was suppressing wages for everyone until one of my staff was like, "Boo, like we can't get paid until you get paid more." Like we just, and that in itself is very archaic sort of thinking, that the ED needs to be like the one who is paid the most. Like why? Like, like that doesn't make any sense either. And when I move into my new organization, like I wasn't the highest paid person, even though I was the ED there. It was a woman of color because she had more experience, so she deserved to be paid more. So again, like if you are into this ED work, which I'm thankful for, you don't have to do the same thing, right? This scarcity and martyrdom thing, it has been gripping our sector. And it's been very powerful, this scarcity mindset, this martyrdom mindset. And it does damage. Like, so we really have to get over it. We got to figure out how to address it.
So we've got just a few minutes left before we're done for the evening, and everybody can go have hopefully a nice evening. Any last questions or anything before we let Vu give us kind of his closing thoughts?
I have a question.
Sure.
Hi, Victoria. I've been appreciating your expressions, reactions.
Thank you, Vu. I came across your name and your website through a sea artist gardener off of out of the West Coast. She's now in Michigan, and she might still be in Africa right now, but who knows? She's cool people. After having just basic conversation like we're having right now with a program officer for about 5 years, the topic of discussion was always a solution to the affordable housing crisis. And I actually came up with a financing theory that tons of real estate developers, bankers, senators, folks think it could really work in the real world. I have potential partners and collaborators in mind. What do you think is the best next step to get started? Because I'm submitting the proposal sometime this week to the program officer after playing those stupid ass games for most of this year. I'm really mad. Like I'm very, very, very angry with this guy. So, but I have the solution and it needs to come out there. It's not about me at all. And it could definitely change some lives overnight. So
Yeah, I'm not so sure how advice that would be helpful for you, Victoria, without knowing more of the
Sure.
context of the situation. And also, I'm not so sure my advice would actually be helpful, because oftentimes it is just like, we need to just be a lot angrier. And this is what program officers are kind of scared of, because they're so used to being sucked up to
okay.
and treated with deference. And I
Mhm.
remember one time, this doesn't mean that it will work for you, but I remember one time I was talking to a program officer of the Gates Foundation. Is the recording still on? Okay. Of a major foundation in Seattle.
I can stop it if you want.
No, it's okay. It's okay. And I was like, look, this is the only, I am on the board of an organization, an education coalition. It's the only one that is led by people of color. And you're only giving us like $20,000 when you're giving out hundreds of thousands elsewhere. Like that doesn't seem equitable. And the program officer got very defensive and upset. And I could have pulled back and was like, you're right, sorry, for upsetting you, etc. But I just held my ground. I was like, you know what? No, like this is unacceptable when you keep talking about equity and diversity and inclusion, and yet you are only funding us $20,000 per year for 1 year at a time. And what I'm asking for is $150,000 over 2 years, which is still a very small amount, right? And we left it kind of tense. And 2 weeks later, she called me and was like, "Vu, you're right. Like we should invest more. So here's $150,000." Later on, when I applied again for the new organization I founded, I applied for $1.1 million. And you know how much I got? $1.1 million. Like this is, and it's because I was able to get into that space where our communities deserve better, and we speak for them. And sometimes we have to be angry. We have to be strategic, sure, but sometimes we do have to be angry. And Victoria, I don't know if that advice would be helpful for you, but I just want to let you know that your work is important and your voice is important. And so I hope that you figure out when to really use it. And if this program officer who is an asshole, becomes an asshole, that's okay. We got to be okay with sometimes failing too and taking risks.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. I deeply, deeply understand the sentiment that it's okay to get angry.
Yes.
So we have a question from actually our nonprofit management class that is here right now in this building with me. Jennifer Battle's class. I think we have a question from somebody there.
Do you know if they're able to hear me? Are y'all able to hear me? Or
yes.
Yes.
Okay. My question's probably stay closer to a softball. So you talked a lot about the stresses and the difficulties that come with our work. I'm curious as a young person with a partner that I'm moving into, what sort of stresses does that bring into relationships, and what are ways that you can sort of help talk about, I don't know, just work through that? What have you learned by you doing that?
Yeah, well, I married an educator who worked at a 95% low income school. And so all of our conversations ended up talking about racism and poverty. And I think at some point we're like, you know what? We really need to figure out how we can leave some of this work at home. At work, right? But the reality is that this is who we are. This is what attracted us to one another, was that we were so focused on justice. And so I don't want you to have any hard and fast rules about we can't talk about work at home or whatever either. You got to figure out what works for you. But you have to be intentional about how do you spend time with one another in a way that brings you both energy, right? Have date nights. Do whatever, whatever works for you. But yeah, this and just be thoughtful that doing this work, especially doing this work, it will affect your relationship. You will come home stressed. You will have financial stress, which is a major obstacle and a major reason for a lot of tension between couples, is that so many problems can be addressed if you just had enough resources. And if you don't, then yeah, it's going to be a huge stress for you both. So just be aware of that and figure out and make some agreements with one another that we're not gonna fight with one another when it comes to certain expenses or whatever it is. It is hard, but it's also it's not hopeless either. Some of the most rewarding relationships that I've had is because I'm with someone who truly believes in what we're trying to do, just to make a better world, and our kids benefit from it too. We're creating a better world for them, and if you're aligned with that, then that makes a very strong foundation for a relationship.
Last question, because it's in the chat. For recent grads, where do you recommend us starting if we want to go into the nonprofit management sector, but don't want to fall behind the ladder of being underpaid? I would love to hear this too.
Oh boy, I don't know. I'm not the best person to talk about this because I was underpaid for a long time. I was an ED after 2 years of AmeriCorps, and I was making $35,000 as an ED. And then I underpaid myself and everyone around me. I'm like a terrible model for this. So this is, but I think what would be helpful is like, eventually I did end up in a space where I'm making a lot more money, and I'm like right now financially secure for the first time in my life. And so it is possible, right? So I would say find an organization that treats you well, that has a like a strong sort of pay equity philosophy, right? And you can tell some of the signs, like, do they disclose their salary ranges in the job posting? Do they have a, you know, a salary scale that they're proud of? And are they afraid when you bring up gender wage gaps and stuff like that? Find the organizations that are not afraid to tackle these things and that are very open and transparent about things. And find the organizations that you love. And if you're gonna work for like a scrappy startup organization that you found something, just kind of be aware of this and maybe find a partner who works in technology or who is a supermodel who can support you and subsidize your work. I'm kind of kidding about this.
Kind of not. Okay, so I lied. We have one more question because it's from the class, so I'm gonna take it. Go ahead.
Hi, this has been a great conversation. So a little bit louder. Where's the mic? Like, does it matter? Okay. Well, one of the things that you mentioned, right, was like working in an organization and kind of like reforming it or dismantling it or getting rid of like these oppressive systems from which like nonprofits were founded. So I'm asking for advice of like, how do you do that? Like, what is the first step to doing that as someone with like little to no power? And also like understanding the fact that like, I'm a woman of color, daughter of immigrants. I need to support my mom. I need to like support my family. So it's like, I recognize like how harmful like they were, like these nonprofits have been constructed, but it's like, I also care about the work and I also, you know, see the harm in it. And so it's like this constant battle, but like I try to learn how to build that power from within. Understanding that like I don't really have that much power with like my position, and I don't think a lot of us do when we first, you know, graduate and go into these nonprofits.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. You know, I'm all about sort of burning it down and starting over from the ashes or whatever. But I'm also not Pollyanna-ish, you know. And also, I think the burden for burning down systems need to fall on people who are the most privileged in our sector, right? And that means men and white folks and so on. So yeah, I would say I would encourage you to try to do the best you can. But also, like, women of color have carried the sector for a long time and have been punished a lot for pointing out inequities and trying to change systems. And those of us who have privilege need to step in, and so that you can take a break. So I would encourage you to try to do what you can, but also like you deserve to have a break. You deserve to not have to fight every single battle out there, right? And so I hope that you don't feel guilty when you're just like, you know what, I don't have the energy to try to burn down the system right now. I gotta take care of my mom. That's perfectly valid. And I hope that you really understand that, because, you know, this work is gonna be for the long run, and we have to take care of ourselves and we have to take care of one another while we do it. So yeah.
And I think that's actually a great note to end the evening on. Any last words besides that, Wu, that you want to share with the group?
I appreciate you all. I know it's easy for me to just pop up on Zoom and just sort of like rant about stuff, right? But I know what it's like to do this work. I know what it's like to be financially unstable or where you're trying to get work done and try to take care of your families and at the same time. So I can empathize. There's a lot of challenges in our sector. And at the same time, I love our sector. I love social work and I love social workers because we're out there, you know? We're talking about the arena, but we're talking about people who are like not in the arena, just pointing and criticizing. Well, we are actually in the arena, and we may fail sometimes. We may, you know, not achieve what we come to achieve, but we're still there. we're still in the arena, trying to make the world better. And I have so much respect for you because of that. But that also comes with the fact that you don't have to be in the arena all the time either. You have to take a break. You have to take care of yourself. And you have to give yourself the grace to do that and not feel as much guilt that society has trained you to feel. All right, so please take care of yourself. I hope that we'll meet in person at some point soon. And just remember that you're amazing and I appreciate you so much. And here's a picture of a little baby otter. I'll send you off there. There you go.
Thank you so much, Boo. And also remember, Unicorns on Fire, available Barnes & Noble. My copy is sitting on my front porch as we speak. Hopefully it's still there. If you want to order Boo's book, but also his blog. Just reading his blog, I think, every week is actually like chicken soup for the soul. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Boo. Have a great evening, and hopefully we'll be able to do something similar to this in the future.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.